Last month, the Office for National Statistics published figures which showed that 53% of women born in 1991 were childless on their 30th birthday last year. For the first time ever, half of women at 30 are childless. Birth rates, more broadly, are also in long-term decline. Some observers have welcomed this information as a demonstration of women's greater freedom and choice to pursue their own lifestyles, careers and interests that are not confined to child-rearing and domesticity. However, others have expressed worry that this might be due to a growing culture of antinatalism and ambivalence towards commitment, relationships and family life. Even financial pressures with the cost of rent and housing increasing, prospective parents feel less confident about bringing children into the world. So why are women delaying having children, if they are having children at all? I'm joined now by Dr. Ellie Lee, Professor of Family and Parenting Research at the University of Kent, and Louise Perry, a columnist at The New Statesman. Firstly, I'll start with you, Ellie. Why do you think women are delaying having children?
Well, it's not new. So this is quite a long-standing trend. And I think it's important to note as well that it's not just this country. So this is something which is happening in lots and lots of countries. I think that there's an extent to which it's in some ways an inevitable outgrowth of things that have changed in women's lives, a lot of which most of us would think are quite positive, to do with women's changed relationship with higher education, with career and so on. But I do think that one of the things that's a big issue is I don't think that we have a culture which is genuinely supportive and positive of parenthood, which does anything like enough to present the significance of it as part of adulthood to people in a positive way and backs that up practically. The thing I think that's most distinct about the last decade, and you mentioned it in your introduction to this segment, is that I do think there is now a fairly systematic antinatalism which is articulated and argued for, where literally children are presented as a bad thing, and we're better off if there's fewer of them, and which celebrates people not having them. And I think that, at an individual level, it's important for people to make choices. Having children isn't for everybody, but I think it is very, very objectionable and very problematic to have a kind of unchallenged, more and more systematic elaboration of hostility to children and parenthood. And I think it's something that people need to take on. And I don't think it is being taken on at the moment. I mean, if you look at the response to this discussion, when people try and say there's a problem, they talk about the fact, for example, that there aren't going to be enough taxpayers in the future, which undoubtedly may be true. But it's hardly an inspiring comeback on antinatalism. And I think that we need to find a way of giving real meaning to the significance of parenthood, because it's a very, very important thing. As I say, it's not for everybody, but it's certainly necessary for the future of humanity, and something we should talk about positively and find positive ways of backing people up who want to do this. It's a really good thing to do. And it's a good thing to want to play a role in the development of the new generation.
And what do you think about some of the sentiments that Dr. Ellie Lee has just expressed, Louise? I mean, on the one hand, you have this cultural support for an antinatalist worldview, but on the other hand, you also have many young people expressing worry about the cost of living, barely being able to keep afloat, let alone even finding a partner. So there doesn't seem to be much kind of cultural, economic and political support for actually young women or young people in general having children.
Yeah, I believe I agree with every word that Ellie just said. Extremely well put. I think there's a complicated confluence of factors, and it's important to remember that this isn't unique to the UK. People will often talk, for instance, about the high costs of childcare in this country, it's true, childcare is expensive in this country, but there are other parts of the world that have lower birth rates than we do, including other parts of Europe. Like the correlation between childcare costs and birth rates is not as obvious as you might think, which suggests that there are other things going on. So sometimes the explanation for this phenomenon that you'll hear is it's the economy stupid. Basically, that's all it is. People are just making a rational decision not to have children given the expense. And that is absolutely true. I mean, I say this as someone I was born in 1992 and I had my first child just before I turned 30. So I just scraped through on the ONS's assessment of the of birth rates for my generation. And it's absolutely the case that it is very difficult with high house prices, and also in an economy where the expectation is 2 full-time incomes, which is obviously a feminist achievement in some sense, in the fact that women now have the right to work full-time and have access to professions like journalism that we didn't used to have access to. But it does also mean that it's that much more difficult to negotiate family life around work life, because you need one person at least to be constantly with a baby until they go to school. This is just the reality of parenting. And so either one of you does that yourself, or you fit your part-time hours together, which is very, very difficult, but in many workplaces that don't permit flexible working, or you employ someone else to do it for you, which is very expensive. So the fact is, it is economically challenging, but I think more than that, there is a network effect when it comes to having children or not having children, where if you have someone close to you, a friend or a sister or whatever, who has a baby, you are much more likely to have a baby yourself. And similarly, if people around you are not having babies, you're much less likely to have a baby yourself. So you end up with this kind of acceleration of the trend as childlessness or coming to parenthood later in life becomes more and more normalised. And the thing is that actually, if you ask women, the vast majority of women and men too will say that they do want to have a baby at some point. It's quite rare actually to have people who are dead against having children at any stage in their lives. The problem is that in order for it to happen, you have to have everything sort of lining up. You have to find a partner at the right time. Your fertility has to come good. And all of this is unfortunately not lining up for enough people. And I think it is really tragic that there are people who would love to become parents and never end up doing so because of their circumstances. And
also, I mean, Louise, you've kind of written about pornography and dating and things like that. Do you think that the commodification, or even the way in which a lot of intimacy and relationships and sex is now filtered through technology is a factor in maybe a resistance to commitment, a resistance to relationships? Do you buy that argument at all?
I think that the dating market is brutal, partly as a consequence of what you mentioned to do with porn culture and the sort of casualisation of dating culture in a way. I think particularly for women who are really determined to find a partner with whom to have children, Tinder is not a very conducive environment to finding a partner who wants that. So I think that is, I'm sure that is an element among so many other elements, and this is why I think thinking about this in a global sense is important, because this isn't just about the failures of the Tory government, whatever, manifold as those may be. If that were the case, we wouldn't be seeing this happening in Japan, South Korea, Italy, Spain, Singapore, all of these countries that have below replacement birth rates now. I think that there is something to do with late modernity, which suppresses family size. And the evidence from looking at other countries that have tried to introduce pronatalist policies is actually really, really hard to reverse.